All right, what's going on, everybody? Grab your mochas, grab your lattes, grab your cappuccino, whatever the hell you're drinking. It's your boy Jobbers and Goons. I am one of your co-hosts today for the coffee shop, and I have another member of the coffee shop here today to do this video with me. It's going to be a collab, kind of exploring the cosmology of DC. Something that's very interesting and something I just did for Marvel, and it's going to be awesome because we're going to do classic DC just like I did classic Marvel. Then we'll compare the two, and then we'll move into the modern side of Marvel and DC in later videos. So today is just classic DC and exploration of the cosmos. And here today, like I said, I brought a fellow coffee shop member, my boy Lumos Theramax. I'm gonna let him talk about himself real quick and explain why I brought him on the channel, which is obviously he knows a lot of DC. So go ahead.
Yo, what's up guys, it's me Limbo Theramax. Definitely glad to be here repping some real sick DC content. I love some cosmology and I'm looking forward to getting to some real sick stuff with Splash over here.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through every layer like I did on my Marvel cosmology video. If you haven't seen that, make sure to check it out after this because these two cosmologies will be compared in a video later. But to do this, we have to go through every layer, give kind of the low ball or high ball if there is one, explain the layer, how it fits, and why it matters. And at the end of this video, you should have a pretty good understanding on the classic DC cosmology layout and how it would scale. I believe we're going to 2000, right?
Yeah, we're going DC all the way up to 2000 because that's before, honestly, Jeff Johns got his hands on things and just started changing everything.
Yeah, and similar to Marvel, we're going to cut it off to where there's a major discrepancy in how the cosmology is treated. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoy this. We're going to get right into it. Without further ado, let's begin. So first layer we're going to talk about is reality itself, or with this Earth. Basically, this would be the DC equivalent of Earth 616. Very simple, just the universe that the mainline Earth resides within in DC Comics. For this low ball, you would use Uni to Uni Plus. There are statements scattered throughout classic DC that says all the time in space is either infinite or endless. So you can use that. And in the high ball, you could say is highball infinite 4D if we take it literal, like conceptually time and space within just a normal DC mainline reality would be endless or to the infinite degree. And for that, it would be a highballed 4D or 5D with absolute highball slash wank. This is a decent baseline to have. As obviously, the size of the universe, so to speak, wasn't as big of a deal in DC Comics back then. If they were going with outside of the cosmos, they were, going usually to different dimensions or whatnot. So this part of reality, I don't feel is as expressly worked upon back then in terms of how it scales compared to the rest of the cosmology. But even still, with the lack of emphasis on the size and structure of the regular universe in DC at this time, because if you guys didn't know, Marvel and DC were literally bouncing like cosmic writers back and forth. For example, one of the big ones, Jack Kirby, who's responsible for the Fourth World. So they didn't do a crazy exploration, but in my opinion, it still scales decently high for this layer. What do you think, Lumos, about the layer?
Yeah, so the cool thing about this is, as you said, is they just kind of expanded out in higher realms for the most part. And of course, they do lots of crazy, awesome stuff on Earth. It's just one of those things to where until more of the modern day, we don't get to explore a lot of what's going on inside the concepts of like the quote unquote, like a singular world.
Agreed. So that's the first layer, reality. And with that layer done, I'm going to go ahead and let my boy Lumos get into the second one.
So the Speed Force wall, which is the thing beyond just the worlds that exist, because at this point in time, the bleed actually was not a concept that DC had touched up on. That was dragged in via Wildstorm comics in the New 52 down the way. So the Speed Force wall was the next thing you hit, and it kind of barely edges in here because Mark Waid introduced this concept, I think, right towards the end of the 90s. I think in 1994, as a matter of fact, I take it back. And this is essentially where you'll go, where all timelines will essentially meet, because this thing is what gives all conceptual motion to everything below it. And this is where you'll hit to go to anything metaphysical beyond it. And so, as a low ball, we're looking at hyper. It contains everything below it, which should be an infinite amount of worlds, as well as a high ball is high hyper, which is infinite amount of dimensions beyond that. So pretty straightforward stuff, but barely squeaking in right at the end of the run here with Mark Wade.
Yeah, and this would be something conceptually that kind of serves as a barrier aspect in the cosmology, more as like a placeholder. So it's not as big of a deal, and like he said, it's kind of just squeezed in. But moving on into the next layer, this is where, in my opinion, we get outer versal, even as a baseline for realms here on out. This would be the God Sphere. Now, the God Sphere, I think, has... I mean, Lumos might disagree, but it's probably got the most controversial arguments around it in terms of how it scales, its power, what it represents, all that shit. But we're going to get into what we actually know, especially in the classic era. And a lot of this we can use in reference to the Ostranger Spectre run. The God Sphere, you don't need Platonism to... And even then, Platonism only has a couple parts among all the writings that even justifies being outer. You don't need that. The God Sphere, according to Spectre, contains beings that are archetypal in nature, with a design from the presence himself to basically inherently follow something conceptually. For example, Darkseid, a member of the God Sphere, conceptually cannot understand someone being stronger than him. He literally believes he's supposed to be God, and he will always strive to be the big dog because he can't imagine you being above him. He has to usurp whoever he's going against conceptually. Like, that's just how he is made. They are beyond the concepts of time, space, dimensions, and they are supposed to represent like ideas in nature. And for example, you know, Darkseid being evil or destruction or dominance. And there's several other characters like him spread throughout. So with the true form God Sphere, definitely lowball would have arguments for baseline outer, obviously being archetypal figures beyond math, science, dimensions, all that shit. They would be baseline outer. Highball, just regular outer versal. These are beings that are archetypal in nature, and massively, you would believe, transcend the Speed Force wall. So that is the next layer, which is the God Sphere. Pretty good scaling for the God Sphere. And like I said, one of the most controversial to argue about, but I do believe firmly that the true God Sphere is outer versal, even in classic DC. And with that, I'm going to let Lumos take over for the next layer.
So, kind of connected in a variety of ways to the God Sphere was the quantum realm, which was touched up very heavily throughout pretty much all of the runs, including Captain Atom. And essentially, it's the underpinnings of all of creation, where quantum mechanics are at work and can affect everything from the lowest levels of creation down in the orrery all the way up to essentially leading you into the time stream, and can even help you navigate things beyond the dimension where they're in. And the quantum realm is essentially where you can go to manipulate individual timelines of worlds and traverse them and meet other versions of yourself, as well as tamper with aspects of the physical worlds and everything below it. It's definitely one of the more awkward and weird realms at this point in time, because it wasn't very well established, to be honest.
Yeah, and just to give people like kind of an interesting perspective on this realm, by the way, what would you say the quantum realms low ball, mid balls are, or high ball?
I think that at a low ball it'd probably be outer, because this realm definitely extends out past the Speed Force wall, and tampering with it, you can mess with really, really high tier characters such as Necron at this point in time. And as a high ball, probably a mid. It's probably just flat out outer, in all honesty, in comparison.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue it's relative to God Sphere, but we also could say possibly beyond. So, regardless, it adds another layer to the cosmology to consider. And with that, we're going to get into the next one, which is the time stream. So the time stream would be a metaphysical concept that envelops everything that consists of prior to this layer. What that means is we have to literally, even if we don't have a bunch on the time stream, we get to piggyback off literal direct scaling. So with the low ball, given that the high ball for the time stream would be like outer to mid outer, maybe we could get layers into outer versal at this point for the time stream. If we had to for the high ball, low ball, it would be probably mid outer, outer to mid outer. But the high end, like I said, would be layers into it. It's just one of those layers that inherently should transcend those before it. And so because of that, its value is going to be naturally higher. So I would say this gets us into like mid-outer area for scaling. Now, there is, of course, another layer beyond this, and several more actually. So I'm going to let Lumos discuss Limbo.
So Limbo was a really weird realm at the time. Limbo is essentially this place where people go where they're forgotten. And if you leave this place, you forget it immediately. And it's outside of everything we've discussed so far, because this is essentially where you go to die conceptually. This place is a really messed up layer, and it's lowball layers into outer because obviously it transcends anything before us, and of course layers into high outer as well, simply because as a highball, because everything before it is infinitesimal to it, let alone if you can even make it here from anything that comes before that. And even the Spectre, like the really high-end characters like in the Ostranders run, were banished here in an attempt to just keep them outside of everything that's come before them. Like Godsphere characters, whenever they were bad, they'd be banished to this realm because it was so far beyond their normal capabilities.
All right, and the range you'd say for this, it's not too crazy above, or how would you look at it?
Limbo would definitely be beyond like everything we've discussed here for sure. Layers into high outer versal, I think, is pretty safe, considering this is essentially like the worst place you could be for even like high-end characters like the God Sphere, or even characters from like the Time Stream.
Yeah, I think low ball, Limbo is definitely layers in the outer. High ball probably mid plus to high outer. I'd agree with that. It's not it's definitely a realm that's discussed further later, but back then most that we knew, it was literally a spot potentially you could find presence in at some point. Like Spectre went investigating there as one of the hot spots after he couldn't find the presence. So it definitely is a weird realm that needs considering in the hierarchy of scaling for DC Classic Cosmology. Next, we have the fifth dimension. Obviously, this dimension is made famous by Mr. Mixie, the imagination imp that trolls Superman quite often. Now, this realm, even in the classic days, should be pretty broken, considering the fact that it's oftentimes described as just being beyond everything below it, like massively. So there should be a good degree of transcendence there. This is a realm comprised of basically imagination, like beings like Mixie basically just do whatever they think of or what they want, and to the degree that extends depends on how far they want to extend it. In most cases, especially if they're in realms below them. For the scaling for the imagination realm of the fifth dimension, realm of the imps, I'd say low ball, mid to high outer, but high ball, it would be high outer and possibly layers into high outer. Most likely a mid to high outer realm in nature, but definitely a realm you don't want to sleep on with scaling. What do you think?
I mean, I'm for sure. I'm definitely with you on that one. In World's Funniest, they literally just destroyed everything below the fifth dimension. Like, Mr. Mixie and Batman, like, casually playing, and they very heavily imply they do it every Tuesday. Characters here are wildly powerful and don't care about any cosmic structure below them, casually.
Yeah, they have some pretty wonky scaling here, especially classic Mixie. What's the next layer to introduce and go over?
So beyond this, we have hypertime, and hypertime is this idea of everything that can, will be, potentially be, or ever was being kept in this pan-dimensional room that you can access. And obviously, it contains everything below it, any story that could potentially come from any of them, contained within verse at this point in time. And there's no real evidence that it scaled past the source wall at this point in time within the cosmology. And this place could be lowballed pretty safely to mid plus outer. I mean, somewhere pretty safe in mid outer range, or as a highball, most definitely high outer, as it contains everything that could be, is, or never, or potentially could, inside this one container.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Obviously, at that point, the scaling is just literally based off what it would transcend and contain. And it's an interesting addition to the cosmology in terms of bolstering the scaling a bit. The next realm would be Source Wall in the Source. Now, this is something that is made quite obvious to be beyond everything else below it. In specifically, like for me, big one I think of Ostrander's run, when the Source asked Spectre to consider the will of creation and how everything operates as the Source. And when Spectre did merge with it, it was like infinite compared to everything he had experienced prior, which would be the realms before this. So my point with that is the scaling for the Source Wall and the Source is quite crazy as a governing protection from outside realms, as well as the Source being what helps govern creation. This low ball for such a powerful realm would be at least high outer versal. Given at this point we're dealing with a power that is so damn broken, oftentimes people confuse it with the presence itself. For the high ball, it would be layers into high outer versal. As we know, this is just a realm and a power source massively beyond everything that comes before it, and really governs what comes before it. So nothing before this like remotely scales to it. I'm pretty confident in saying it's like a layer or two above even hypertime. So yeah, the Source Wall and then the Source would be high outer to layers into high outer. And with that, I'm gonna let Lumos discuss the next realm.
So beyond the Source Wall, we have at this point in time what everybody refers to as the Void. The Void is essentially this massive space where all these creations are kept. And it's a pretty enigmatic space at this point in time. We get a few references to it in the Lucifer series, as well as the Swamp Thing series, coming out in the 80s as well as the early 90s. And this plane is most definitely high outer for sure, transcending everything that we kind of understood below it. And you'll notice that is getting very consistent with a lot of what we're talking about, is most of these realms are just pan-dimensional in nature for everything below them in cosmology. And only the most powerful beings in creation being the Void, can possibly traverse this plane. Characters like Lucifer or like the Presence would find themselves traversing this plane. And yeah, it's definitely a high outer plane, one of the best places you can be for scaling within the context of classic cosmology.
Yeah, it's definitely high outer. One of the strongest aspects of the verse we could possibly introduce you guys to in the classic cosmology, but it's not the final verse or aspect of the verse. We actually do have another layer to discuss as potentially being there. This would be the realms that would contain either the presence or the great darkness. So I'm going to kind of get into what I mean by that. So for all of the great expanse of heaven, for all the great expanse of never-ending hell, there is a darker, unfathomable end to the hell, right? There is a bottom beyond all bottoms, a dark beyond all dark. just evil beyond all. It's not even evil. Like, it's conceptually beyond anything we could describe. This would contain the primal force of a being like the great evil darkness, which would be something made to rise up against the likes of presence. And on the other hand, we have someone that should be at the farthest ends of creation, beyond even creation itself, as he's one who governs it and helps create it. Presence, this is the being that, of course, came down to confront great evil darkness at one point in the classic era, saving all of the cosmology. And these realms, while they're not entirely, it'd be kind of dishonest to be like, oh, the realms are always talked about. We do know they exist and that these beings come from higher or lower places, depending on what you're talking about. So they should exist, and thus they should be layers into high outer for both. And would be like the peak of the classic cosmology, bringing the cosmological exploration of classic DC to a halt at high outer versal, or layers into high outer versal, which is pretty dope because so is classic Marvel, which I made a video on, which I mentioned you should go watch. But anyways, guys, this has been a tour, an exploration of classic DC scaling. Again, it was not just me on this video. I brought my homeboy Lumos, who also makes content on comics. And if you are a comic fan or a fan of scaling, you definitely need to go subscribe to him right now. And I'm going to let him talk about some of the stuff he's working on real quick. So go ahead.
Yeah, guys, it's been a blast coming in, and definitely check out my DC Cosmology video. It'll give you a pretty good idea of what we do here, obviously just with a lot more details flat out thrown into your face. It's a massive video. So if you get the chance, feel free to check it out. It was a blast having me. Right now I'm working on a bunch of Lantern content because that's kind of my specific area of expertise, and as well as Cosmology. I've got a bunch of Cosmology videos getting ready to be cranked out, and I'm looking forward to doing it.
Yeah, and again, thank you for coming on here for this. He's big into DC. Definitely recommend him and his server if you want to check out DC Scaling. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. It's been your host, Jobbers and Goons, my boy Lumos as well. The coffee shop, make sure to go check out our other members as well. And we will see y'all later. Peace.